Hello and welcome to Miniature Painting with the Jolly Good Giant. I'm your host, the Jolly Good Giant. Today we're going to be painting up a Reaper Miniatures Zombie Shark, model number 44112. Today's video is brought to you by Plaid. They supplied all the paints and brushes and sealers for this video. I'm going to be using the colors here, Folk Art Green Meadow, Delta Navy Blue, Folk Art Dark Gray, Folk Art Engine Red, Apple Barrel Flamenco Red, Delta Multi-Surface Black, Folk Art Multi-Surface Dove, and Folk Art Multi-Surface Yellow Ochre. I'm also using a 10-pack of Folk Art Premium brushes, and from that I'm going to be using a 10-0 round, a 0 round, and a number 2 flat. I'm also going to be using a Folk Art brand foam brush to do my base coat. So I put some stages here of the shark so we can do it quicker. Just so you know, this is for gameplay. It's not really for what they call shelf display or collector display. I start out with the green meadow. I dip my brush in it and completely paint it green. So normally I like to paint my models black. But in this case, I wanted it to appear that the shark was gangrene and it was rotting from the inside out. So we're going to do some regular sharker colors over that. So the next color that I would put on here using the number 2 flat brush is going to be the navy blue. Now I've already mixed a little bit of the Folk Art Mod Podge Ultra in here. And I'm going to dry brush a little bit of this navy blue just on the skin. I don't want to actually get into any of the wounds because I want that to be red and pussy and later. So to dry brush, I dip my brush in the paint and then I dip it off, wipe it off a little bit on either a cloth or a piece of paper off to the side. And I'm just going to keep light, quick strokes to apply the navy blue over the green to give it a little bit more of a natural color, because we don't know what kind of shark this is. It's just a shark. I mean, if you want to paint it like a specific type of shark, that's up to you. But I'm just going for an anything shark. Another benefit of dry brushing as opposed to wet brushing is that the paint dries quicker, so it's easier to handle and move on to the next step. I'm going to use the same brush. Now we have one here that's already dry. We're going to apply the Folk Art Dark Gray to that. Same method. We're going to dry brush that on to go over the blue a little bit, so some of that gray skin shows through. Again, so it's giving the appearance that the gangrene is coming out from the inside of the model of the shark. So when you're done, you let it dry and it'll look like this. You have the green base with a little bit of blue on there, a little bit of gray over that. So you have your gray shark body. Next step is we're going to use a little bit of the Folk Art Engine Red. I'm still going to use the number 2 flat brush for this. We're going to get that in there and some of these open wounds and brush some of these internal organs a little bit. Glop it in there a little bit. We still want to dry brush, but we can glop it in there a little bit more to make it look like it's sort of oozing blood a little bit. I mean, I realize it's an underwater animal, but I mean, if it's a zombie, who's to say it's not going to crawl up on land to try to get you? I don't know. Your characters in your game. This is a cool model because it's all in one piece. And it's open enough that you can get in all the crevices and stuff, and it's not difficult to paint like some other models I've seen out there. Again, I'm doing less dry brushing with this because I want it to be oozy-ish. I just keep making up words today. Now I'm going to do more dry brushing with the blood. Some different spots on here. In this particular model, there is one sort of a molding defect where there's like this round little bump here where it must be where they inject the resin or the plastic that they use to make the mold. I'm going to make that out to be a wound. So I'm going to paint that bloody red, like maybe that's what killed the shark or it was infected with something there. And so we're going to make that part of the model. Or it's already part of the model. We're going to incorporate it in a little more, like it's supposed to be there. Just going to let that sit for a second. All right, so while that's drying a little bit, I'm actually going to move on and use the next shade of red, the Apple Barrel Flamenco red. This is a little bit flatter red, so it appears more like dried blood. I'm going to use this towards the top of the fin a little more. Parts of the shark that might be exposed to air. And I can mix them in with some of the other blood too. It'll just give it a better effect. And actually slipped up a little bit. What I also want to use is a number 10-0 round. I'm going to go back to the original red, and I'm going to get in some of these smaller wounds. The original red that I was using, the engine red, and get in some of these smaller wounds with a smaller brush. And the eye on the left side is hollowed out, so I'm going to get some red in there and around that. And if you're in a hurry to get your models to dry quicker, you can use a hairdryer set on low setting just to dry the paint quicker because it's acrylic. And like I said, for the most part, I'm dry brushing, doing a little bit of wet brushing here with the blood. But something else that works for my, if you're doing it in a big building or a convention center, you could use a hand dryer in the bathroom. That's what the kids in my painting group do at the library. Use the hand dryers in the bathrooms. Also going to get some of this red inside the mouth. We don't know if it's his blood. We don't know if it's somebody else's blood. Whatever. It's just blood. So while the blood is drying, I am going to use the very same brush I was just using, the 10-0 round, and I'm going to apply some white Dove in this case rather, which is a very light gray, to the teeth. I'm going to be careful to hold the tips of the tail and fins so I don't smear stuff and get even more paint on my fingers. But I'm just going to carefully apply a little bit of white to the teeth as a first layer. Then I'll go over it with the yellow ochre in a few minutes because obviously zombie shark's not going to have bright white teeth. So I'm going to be careful to not get any of the white or gray in this case on the jaw because we want that to be all gangrene and bloody. That's the wonderful effects here. All right, so I'm going to give that a second to dry. I'm going to check to make sure all my brushes are rinsed well and clean. Give my paint a moment to dry before I move on to the next step. When you're rinsing your brushes, you want to make sure they don't get crunched up. I don't know the technical term. You want to keep them nice and flat and pointed. I didn't even use the round yet, the 0 round, but I'm going to do the same thing with that one anyway. And that's when I'm going to use the 0 round. So now, that should have been enough time that most of this paint is dry, and it looks like it is. So I'm going to use the yellow ochre, and I'm going to actually not use the yellow ochre yet. I'm going to rinse that off. So I skipped something. I'm going to use my number 2 flat. I'm going to use get a little bit of black. I'm going to dry brush black around some of these open wounds on the shark to appear like necrotic dead skin. Like it's rotting away and chunks are going to fall off. Actually, I'm going to get some around the eyeball as well, or the missing eye. Get a little bit around that. Go around to this side. There's actually a nice bite mark on the side of this shark. It looks like maybe a human-sized zombie bit him. Some other human-sized animal, and maybe that's how he got infected. So we're going to make that wound very black. We're going to add some yellow to that also in just a few minutes. It's kind of a tiny model. I'm trying to keep it up there so you can see it on the camera. Should we get the wounds underneath a little bit? All right. I'm going to let that dry for a moment while I rinse off my brush again. Rinse it and dry it. And shape it. That's actually what it's called. You pull it flat or to a point, you're shaping them. Okay, now I'm going to use the 0 round brush with the yellow ochre. I'm going to lightly go over the shark teeth again. So we give it a little bit of a pussy sort of look around the mouth, like the teeth are decaying, falling out. We're going to get some of this yellow into some of these open wounds as well to give it a sort of a pussy look coming off the organs. Seems kind of bright now, but once it dries, it'll give it a better effect. I'm not so much dry brushing this on. This is more of a wet brush. I'm using such a small amount on the tip though that I don't really need to dry brush it, which is why I'm using the 0 round brush. Because I also want to get it in some of these smaller, deeper wounds in the back here that a number 2 flat brush wouldn't fit into very well. That's probably good. I don't want to do overkill. And there I did a little overkill. A little mistake. I'm going to dip my brush in some water. Go over that real quick. Rinse it again. The water on there. Rinse it out again. I took a lot of the excess paint off. Once that dries, it'll look fine in this situation. Just spread it around a little bit to give it more of a yellowy look all around. All right, so while that dries, I'm going to rinse my brush again, dry it, shape it, I'm going to use my 10-0 brush once more with the black. I'm going to touch up the eye, the one good eye. I'm going to make that, I'm not dry brushing it, I'm just being very careful to make the eye black. I mean, you could go over it afterward with the yellow again to add the pus sort of look to it, but I just like it to have a black eye. I feel like that's scarier. And then there's a black eye. Then we're going to move on. So once it dries, let's rinse this quick. Once it dries, this is what we have. He's got his blood, he's got his red eye, he's got his pus, and his ooze, and his gore, and he's just all kinds of fun terror. So the very last step, after all the paint is dry, is take your Mod Podge Ultra. It's not just great for mixing in with the paints, it's also a sealer. So this, I found it's easier and more effective to actually paint, to brush the sealer on. So I'm going to use my number 2 flat brush. If you want to use a larger brush, you can, but I just don't want to get a lot of extra on there and create any sort of a clump look. So I'm going to quickly, back and forth, brush this on. One good thing I like about this as a sealer compared to other sealers is that most sealers are spray, aerosol, so you have to worry about toxic smells and stuff. Since I work with a lot of kids and I do painting conventions, workshops and conventions, you can just brush this on and you don't have to take it outside. You can just sit on the table. Again, you can use a hair dryer or a hand dryer to dry it quicker if you're in a hurry. You want to move on to the next event or workshop or panel of a convention. So again, this is matte, so even though it's wet looking right now, when it's done, it'll dry up pretty dry looking. Again, if you wanted it to have a wet look, you would use the gloss Ultra Mod Podge. I'm just going to coat this whole thing. If you feel like you put it on too thick somewhere else, just use your brush to pick it up and move it to another spot. I like to use this on all my models. I've found that it really prevents the chipping of the paint, in my experience. But also mixing it in with the paint as you're painting it helps it a lot too. It just creates a smoother texture on the paint, and it helps with blending the paints, I've found. Almost done here. Again, I just wanted to thank Plaid again for my supplies and for their continued support with my projects. I'll have a video coming out soon on my own channel, JollyGoodGiant on YouTube, where I'm repainting some Fortnite miniatures. So be sure to check that out. And we'll have a final shot of this when it's done and dry so you can see afterward. Because it's going to take a few minutes to dry. And I apologize to anyone if I mumbled in any part of this video. If you have any questions, feel free to message me on either Facebook, Instagram, or through YouTube. I will happily answer any questions you have. Thanks for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.